Researchers and PhD students, are you currently struggling with writing the literature review? Then in this video I'm going to show you exactly my proven framework for writing an excellent literature review, be it for a research paper or for a thesis, and I'll show you specifically how to avoid being descriptive, how to structure a coherent argument in your literature review, how to vary the referencing pattern to ensure a coherent story, how to link your ideas together, and how to lead into the research gap and your research question. So let's dive in and get started. And just to let you know as well that this video is a full presentation that is normally available only on my paid program, PhD Accelerator, but I thought I would make it available for you here as well to provide you as much value and as much help to help you write an excellent literature review. So I hope you will find it really valuable. If you do, hit the like and the subscribe button. Hello everybody and welcome back to week 3 of PhD Accelerator. And in this video we're going to be talking about and showing you how to actually write your literature review. So at this stage, we've covered a lot of ground in this week. You've identified the text that you need to read. You've also learned how to read those texts quickly. You've probably, you've kept a good record of those texts, prepared some organized notes, and then, we gave you a whole template as well and showed you how to structure exactly your literature review. So at this stage, the only thing that is left is to actually go out there and write it. But that when you're writing it, there are a couple of important things and a couple of really typical mistakes that you need to avoid. So I want to show you all that in this lecture so that you after this you're ready to write and you know exactly how to write the rest of your literature review. So let's get started. First of all, we're going to look at how to present a clear argument and avoid being descriptive. Like, if there's one problem with the literature reviews that PhD students write and that supervisors complain about all the time, is that it's descriptive. Now, the problem is that very often no explanation is given. So you're just told you need to be more critical. You're too descriptive, right? But how do you actually do that? Well, in this video, I'm going to show right at the very start, I'm going to show you exactly how to present a clear argument, avoid being descriptive, and also how to be more critical in the literature review and what that actually means. So you'll come out with a lot of clarity and you'll be able to avoid this really most common mistake with the literature review. And then we're also going to look at how you need to summarize information from various sources in order to better support your point and develop a more coherent argument. And then we're also going to look at another aspect of writing a literature review, which is focusing on one study in more detail. And then I'm also going to show you how to vary your reference pattern so that you avoid constant repetitions and you have a wider variety of language, but also of the ways in which you can emphasize certain things and again maintain better coherence. Because really, where you put your references and how you use them can also either help or derail coherence in your paragraphs. And finally, I'm also going to show you how to transition between ideas in sentences, between paragraphs, and even between different chapters of your thesis, so that everything really flows really well in your literature review and you can develop an excellent coherent argument. So let's get started with the first point. And while I was preparing this, I think I felt a little bit hungry, and I was thinking about waffles because I live in Belgium currently, and Belgium, one of the things that Belgium is very famous for is waffles. And this reminded me of this word in English that is also waffle, but it's to waffle. It's a verb, and it basically means to go on and on and on about something, right? And this is something that you need to avoid. And, as much as waffles are delicious, you probably, don't want to overeat on waffles, because they're not that nutritious and full of sugar and everything. So that's why, at the very beginning, we're going to be talking about avoiding waffling in here. So what waffling is? Waffling basically means, speaking or writing at length in a very vague manner and in a very lengthy manner as well that really fails to get to the point, And this basically means that you're just being too descriptive. So, you're not being precise, you're not being to the point, you're taking a lot of time and space to say a very simple thing, And this is basically waffling, right? And, why do you want to avoid waffling? Because it's really high in calories, right? Waffles are incredibly high in calories, and waffling is the same, It's got a lot of calories, meaning words, but it's low in nutrients. Waffles don't really have many vitamins and nutrients. They're not really very good for us. Granted, they are delicious, but they're not very good for you. And waffling in academic writing is the same. It's got a lot of words, but not many nutrients, as in arguments, right? So you're basically saying a lot, but actually you're not saying anything, to be honest, when you're waffling, right? So how can you avoid waffling? Well, in order to avoid it, you probably should never go to Belgium, because then if you are in Belgium, you're always going to eat waffles. But on a more serious note, you want to be argumentative and critical by reviewing literature that supports a clear point with a clear overarching purpose or goal in mind, aka the pyramid apex. And the last part of it, should be already clear to you, because that's something that I explained in one of the previous videos in this week. If you haven't learned about the pyramid apex, definitely go back there to review it, because a lot of what we're going to cover here isn't going to make a lot of sense otherwise. But, in one of the previous days, we actually identified like the main purpose of each of the sections in your literature review, and even of each of the subsections in your literature review, right? And this is the overarching purpose. Like, if you don't have that purpose, then you're going to be waffling, right? If you have that purpose, you're much more likely to avoid waffling. And what is also very important here is being argumentative and critical, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that as well, right? So just as a quick revision, as I said, we covered it in one of the previous days in week 3. If you haven't done it, go back there and take a look at, the pyramid apex, and really map out, the apex of your pyramid for every section of your thesis and every subsection of your literature review, But just in a nutshell and as a review, the pyramid apex is really the so what question, right? It's basically the main point towards which everything else is leading, and on which the inverted pyramid balances. Because remember, we're talking, we're structuring things in the inverted pyramid way, from general to specific. And that most specific point on which everything else balances and to which everything leads is the pyramid apex, and it's our main argument, right? And if we have that, we can really, avoid waffling. So that's vital, the pyramid apex again. So let me give you a couple of examples, because you might think that I'm talking very high level here and being very theoretical. So let's get a little bit more practical. Let me show you a couple of different types of waffling. I mean, if you've been to Belgium, you know that they have waffles in Liège style and also in other styles in different cities. And it's the same with academic waffling. Waffling comes, really in different styles. And the first type of waffling that you want to avoid is describing how or where a study was conducted when the focus is, for example, on results. So let's say, you're reviewing the literature and telling us like what people have found, and then you say something like, you conduct a case study analysis in China. And it's like, what's the point of it? Like, fair enough, like he or she conducted a case study analysis, but that's not really relevant. I'm not interested in that. It's just, being very descriptive. The second type of waffling is describing what a researcher did and not what they found. And that's a very common problem that I see all the time in students writing. So it's saying something like, Gonzalez discusses wide bias in hiring practices. Okay, I got that, but like, what did Gonzalez find? That's what I'm interested in, like, because, you know, you want to lead us somewhere. So what did Gonzalez find about wide bias in hiring practices, right? This sentence tells us absolutely nothing, right? It's just purely descriptive. Also, you know, describing the main topic of a book or a paper rather than specific and irrelevant message. So, for example, something like, Kaczmarek provides a comprehensive account of grounded theory that covers its definition and typical applications. Well, great, but this doesn't give us, we want a definition of grounded theory right now. That's what I want to know. Not that somebody wrote a definition of it, but you're not giving it to us. That's, again, just being purely descriptive, and it's just pure waffling. It's a lot of calories and very little nutrition. Sorry to interrupt, but if you're enjoying this video and you want more videos like that, you want personalized help writing an excellent thesis or research papers, then schedule a free one-to-one consultation where we're going to dive deeper into your current challenges and prepare a personalized plan that will help you to achieve your goals faster. And then if it turns out it's a good fit, we can talk about how working together would look like. Let's get back to the video. And also, you know, you can, as I said, if you lack a well-defined pyramid apex, you might be going nowhere and you're being purely descriptive. So I'm going to show you a larger chunk of text here. Take a quick look at it. You might want to pause the video and see how, you know, whether this text is going anywhere. Does it have a pyramid apex, right? So if you read it, like, you know, when I read it, my immediate question is like, so what? Like, and like, well, what am I supposed to think about it? Like, where is this even going? You know, it's just, I'm not saying it's completely wrong, but it's just, you know, describing things and describing what other studies have found, but there doesn't seem to be any point to it. It's not going anywhere. You know, like that pyramid is completely out of balance. It doesn't have any apex at the moment, right? And the reader doesn't know what to do with it. Like, if this paragraph ends here, like, I really don't know what to think about it, you know? So that's why it's really important to ask yourself, so what, right? In order to identify that pyramid apex and keep that overarching point in mind whenever you're doing literature review. Okay, so, you know, having a clear pyramid apex is one way to avoid waffling, but another way to avoid it is to be argumentative. So there are a couple of ways in which this can be achieved. First of all, you want succinct presentation. So you want to cut information that is purely descriptive, which I've just shown you before, right? And does not advance the argument. So if you're writing something and like you're just presenting something for the sake of presenting it, but it doesn't serve any purpose, it doesn't lead to the pyramid apex, just cut it. It's pointless calories, right? Just cut them. It's got to be relevant as well. So you want to present the information that is relevant to support the pyramid apex. Because, you know, again, if you imagine this inverted pyramid balancing on the apex, if you put too much on it, on the top, right, and out of balance, it's just going to fall over, right? It's got to be well balanced and it's got to be relevant to hold that apex there. So, you know, for example, if your focus is to critique the previously used methodologies, don't give me the results. I'm not interested in the results. On the other hand, if you're presenting the results of previous studies to advance a certain point of view, then, you know, don't spend sentences giving us the topics of those studies or telling us in depth what the methodology of those studies are, because that's pointless. It's completely irrelevant, right? Also, you know, you need to have clear direction. So remember, you're always going towards the predefined pyramid apex, and you defined it in one of the previous videos here, in one of the previous days of this week. And importantly, there's got to be a defined position as well. You've got to present a clear position and support it with literature, right? And obviously, I don't mean you have to do that in every paragraph or at the end of every subsection, but on a larger scale, like, we've got to see where all these arguments are converging, and there's got to be some sort of clear position to which you're leading us, right? So let's see how this is done in practice. Again, I'm going to show you a larger chunk of text. Feel free to pause this video to read it more carefully, and then try to see how this text is being argumentative and how it avoids waffling. All right, so if you've read this text, you can see that there is very clear direction in this text, right? We've got a very clear apex point. And the writer clearly, has a point. The writer wants to, convince us of something here and prove a certain point. And everything that is before builds to that. There is no, waffle here. I mean, there is some detail about the study, and some detail about the data, but that is very much justified, bearing in mind, what the writer wants to tell us and what the pyramid apex is. And there is a very clear position here. There is nothing in this paragraph that is irrelevant. It's all got a very clear direction towards this last main point that the writer wants to make, right? So that's how you can be argumentative. Now, the third way, so we've got, having a clear pyramid apex and then being argumentative can help us avoid waffling. The third way is to be critical. How can you be critical? Because that's something that you've probably heard from your supervisor. If you haven't heard it yet, don't worry, you're gonna hear it a million times, like you're not being critical enough. You're being descriptive, you're not being critical. But the problem is that, in my experience at least, few supervisors explain it specifically and in detail, step by step, what actually being critical means and how you can actually, carry it out in your thesis, right? So I wanna show you how to do that right here. So one way of being critical is acknowledging the limitations of research, and so when you're referring to certain studies, you could criticize their methodology, right? In order to, for example, say that these studies are flawed, or you might want to acknowledge the limitations and then further, still defend the results of those studies. But that's one way of thinking critically about previous research. You can also defend your own position by presenting valid counter arguments, right? So there might be some limitations to your argument or to the studies that you're using in order to support your argument, but then you might want to acknowledge them first, but then you bring in other studies, the results of other studies, and valid counter arguments in order to still continue advancing your argument, right? So again, let me show you how this is done in practice. So here's another short text. Feel free to pause the video and read it first, right? And as you can see here, there is, we've got the main point presented right at the beginning here in the first sentence, right? And then, the writer is critical straight away of that evidence. So the writer kind of anticipates what critics of this study or approach might say, right? And and the writer acknowledges that the results might be due to the lower number of features, right? But then at the end of that paragraph, the writer still defends the main point of view, right? So if we didn't have that last part of the sentence, if it just finished with this might be due to the lower number of features, we would be like, so what's the point of even presenting that study, right? I mean, you're clearly arguing a point here, right? You want to convince us of something, so do that. Like, acknowledge the limitations of a study or your position. That's very important. But then try to defend it as well, right? And this is how the writer does it here, for example. Now, the third way in which you can be critical is to present the opposing point of view and critique that opposing point of view. So I mean, you've got your pyramid apex, but other researchers might have slightly different pyramid apexes, right? We don't all agree in research, and there's certain areas where, different people have slightly different ideas, right? And that's great, that's fine. So, you need to acknowledge those different points of view. But then, in order to advance your argument, you can't just leave it there. You can't just acknowledge those other points of view and then stop. Because you're advancing towards your apex, you're not acknowledging this obstacle, you know, and then you need to critique it and show it why it's not valid and show us why, you know, we should still go to your apex. How is this done in practice? Well, again, you know, I've got a short chunk of text here for you, right? And if you read it, right, you can see that, you know, the first two sentences kind of present a position, you know, that some researchers have adopted, right? And the writer even gives an advantage of that position and say why this, you know, approach has been successful, right? But then we've got a critique of that approach, right? And then, you know, this critique is probably further developed, right, in order to advance towards our apex. So this is really what being critical means and how you can avoid waffling. So, you know, avoiding waffling and creating a clear argument and being critical, avoiding being descriptive, is a really, really important point. That's why I'm tackling it first, and it's probably the most important point in your literature review, right? That you need to get right on a PhD level. So that's why I also prepared a pinup for you about avoiding waffling, and it's available for you to download in the resources section. It's called Avoiding Waffling Pinup. It's a PDF document, right? So this is what it says. One of the key things in a literature review is avoiding waffling or being descriptive. You need to present a clear argument throughout, and remember, keep the pyramid apex, like imagine that pyramid in your mind, the inverted pyramid with the apex, you know, and present only relevant points that are taking you towards it. So every point that you make should be like one brick that you put, you know, from the top, from the most general bricks to the more and more specific bricks towards the apex. You know, you want to critically analyze previous studies, pointing out the limitation. You know, you want to acknowledge differing points of view, but always maintain a clear and well-reasoned position. You know, remember, you've got to be going and taking us somewhere in your literature review. That's absolutely vital. So I would recommend, you know, you keep it printed somewhere as you're writing your literature review to really remind yourself of this crucial point to avoid waffling. So that's how it's done. So I would encourage you to, you know, immediately put it into practice right now and revise what you've written so far. And if you haven't written anything yet, then, you know, definitely print the pin up here, and when you're writing, really remind yourself. And, you know, and I hope this as well, this analogy with waffles will help you. That, you know, they're delicious and everything, but they're full of calories, i.e. words, but very little nutrients, i.e. very little argument or content in them, right? That's why you want to avoid waffling.
Sorry to interrupt, but if you're enjoying this video and you want more videos like that, you want personalized help writing an excellent thesis or research papers, then schedule a free one-to-one consultation where we're going to dive deeper into your current challenges and prepare a personalized plan that will help you to achieve your goals faster. And then if it turns out it's a good fit, we can talk about how working together would look like. Let's get back to the video.
All right. And now, as you're writing the literature review, there will be two things that you need to do. Like 90% of the time, you will be summarizing information from various sources, and then maybe 10% of the time, you will be focusing on one study in a little bit more detail. So let's first look at, you know, how this works, summarizing ideas from various sources. Take a look at this paragraph that I pulled up here for you, and, you know, pause the video, read it, and think about, you know, this question. What is the problem with the content and the referencing in this paragraph, right? So if you've read this paragraph, you know, you can see that there is just one reference, and it's at the very end of this paragraph, right? Now, there is a lot of information here, and there are a lot of statistics and everything, but we don't know where that information comes from, you know, because the reference is just placed at the very end of the last sentence. So, you know, we can assume that the last sentence comes from there. But what about all the other information? And obviously, another problem is that, you know, we only have support from one
study or one research, right? So that makes this whole argument and this whole presentation much weaker, and it would be, it would be made stronger if we had more referencing here. So, first of all, summarizing information from various sources. What is it, why do we do it, and when do we do it? Let me just add the animation here so that it's not all text at once. So what is it? It's basically using reference to more than one study to support a single point. And it's also using, using different studies within the same paragraph to support the overarching argument. So referring to different papers and books, right? Not just one throughout, for example, the whole paragraph. Why do you want to summarize information from various sources? Well, you want to do it to show you have read widely, right? But you also want to, use it for summing up years or decades of research, because, often we want to say, like, what has been studied in the last 10 years, or how the literature has developed in the last 2 decades or something like this, right? So that's when we need to bring in information from various sources. Obviously, this is also going to add validity to your points, because, if you're using, let's say, 10 studies to support your position or argument, well, then it's much more difficult to disagree with it, right? If you're just using 1 or 2 or maybe 3, then it's much easier to point out problems with it, because they're, this probably means that you haven't looked at the studies that might disprove your position, right? And obviously it increases objectivity as well, because, if your whole argument is based on 1 or 2 studies, maybe from a specific region in the world, it sounds very subjective, and it's very difficult, to maintain objectivity there. When do you want to summarize information from various sources? Well, you want to do it, first of all, to support key points. So if there is an important point that you're making, you should definitely have more than one reference. If also, and that's going to be the case in many parts of your literature review, there will be many studies that have very similar results, or have maybe focused on very similar things and so on. Well, that's when you want to do, that's when you want to use several references. I mean, don't go over the top, like, don't all of a sudden refer to like 10 papers in one kind of reference after one sentence. Typically, it's around 5. 5 is probably like maximum that people use for any given reference, like 5 different papers that they're referring to, And also, you want to use it when you're trying to summarize what we know thus far about a given phenomenon. That's another case. So let me show you a couple of, more practical examples of it, so you can get a better view of what, I'm talking about here. So, in here, we've got a few examples. Several studies have dealt with, right? Other studies have aimed to, and even others have evaluated, right? So in here, the writer clearly is showing us, perhaps, the historical development of research, and, and really what we know thus far about several different topics. And that's why, you can see that every sentence has several references in them, right? So that's one example of summarizing information from various sources. And now in here, I want to draw your attention to one of the tenses that you can see, right, in here, that we had underlined, right, which was have dealt with, have aimed, have evaluated, right? And this tense is called present perfect, and it's very common in a certain aspect of the literature review. And first of all, what is present perfect? Present perfect is basically built of either has or have. So if you have the third person singular, like he, she, or it, it's has, and then everything else is have. And then the past participle, or the third form of the verb, right? So if you have a verb like study, then it's studied, right, in the past participle. Example, several studies have dealt with meringues, or similar systems, right? When do we use it? Well, we use it to sum up years or decades of research, when you're basically connecting the past with the present. And, some typical phrases are like several studies, like what you saw here. Several studies have dealt with, since 2010, researchers have focused on. In recent decades, there has been a lot of development in blah, 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 right? So this is, when you're going to use this tense present perfect, and really only in this specific situation, right? So its use in the literature review is very limited and very specific to this one situation. Now, another way to summarize information from various sources is this, right? So in here, the writer isn't really summarizing what has happened, in the last 20 years or something like this, right? In here, rather, the writer is making important points, and each of these points is supported by more than one reference. Like, for example, the first point has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 references, right? But there is no like, that several studies have studied this, or, since 2010 research has shown. No, it's just, the point, right? That, speakerhood is not a biological but rather a socially constructed trait. And the same with the second point, where we've got 2 references, and then we also have several references in the following point, right? And, notice that in here there is no present perfect. It's just in the present tense. Scholars recognize, Davis points out, is assigned, right? It's all in the present tense because we are making just a specific point, right? So that's another tense that you will have to use, and this tense you will probably use it like 90% of the time in your literature review, and it's present simple, and it really makes your life very easy because, as the name suggests, it is very simple. So basically most of the time is just the base form of the verb. Like in here you have recognize, right? And then, if it's the third person, then you need to add s, like you did with Davis here. Davis points out, right? And that's basically it. It's very simple, right? And when do we use it? You use it to present facts. You're going to use it to present arguments, but you're also going to use it to present results from the literature. So basically you use it for almost everything. In like 90% of the cases, apart from this specific use of present perfect that I showed you here, for everything else, we are using present simple, right? So that will make your life very, very easy. So now, to further sort of consolidate it, I prepared for you a cheat sheet. It's called Reporting Verbs Grammar Cheat Sheet, to help you familiarize yourself with the correct grammar use in the literature review. And it's available for you in the resources section for you to download. It's a PDF document which looks like this, right? So you can download it, right? And then in here, I outlined the 3 main tenses that will be used, right? So present simple and present perfect are the 2 that we've already discussed. We haven't discussed past simple and when it's used, but we will later on in this video, so don't worry, we'll get to that. And then I also talk about, how to use some of the most common reporting verbs in here, and I'll introduce, a good few of them for you so that you can vary your pattern of referencing. But in here, I mostly focus on grammar and how to actually use them. So as a quick explanation, some verbs are only followed by a noun phrase. So for example, one of the participants cast doubt on the problem of, right? I cannot say that, like I cannot say one of the participants cast doubt on that the problem is. No, it's always followed by a noun phrase, right? Then there are some verbs that are only followed by that and a sentence. So like one of the interviewees argued that greater attention should be paid to. I cannot really say, one of the interviewees argued greater attention. It doesn't work, right? And then finally, there are lots of verbs that can be followed by both, by either a noun phrase or that and a sentence, right? So in that case you can choose, and you've got these three here. So I would really recommend again that you print it out or you keep it somewhere available as you're writing the literature review. Whenever you're in doubt, which tense should I use, how do I use a particular reporting verb to use it correctly, then so you've got this and you can avoid making mistakes. All right, so so far we've looked at how and why you need to summarize information from various studies. Let's now look at how you can focus on one study in more detail. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is much less common than summarizing information from various studies. So if you're in doubt, focusing on something is much less used. Maybe like 10% of the time in the literature review, you're going to use it. 90% of the time, you're going to be doing summarizing information from various sources, which I've just shown you. But sometimes in certain specific cases, which I want to show you now, it is very appropriate to focus on one study in a little bit more detail. So what is it, first of all? So as the name suggests, it's basically presenting one particular study in greater detail in more than one sentence, right? Sometimes even in a whole paragraph. Why do we do something like this? Why would you want to focus on one study in more detail? Well, you want to do it to add specific information that is necessary to support our argument. So in here, again, we are thinking about the pyramid apex, right? And our main argument. So that's, I know I've repeated this a lot, this pyramid apex, but it is crucial. If you don't have it, you're going to mess up your literature review. I promise you, you need it for everything. So you want to know your pyramid apex, and then if adding more specific information and more detail makes sense, then definitely do it, right? When do we do it? When the study is key and the detail is required to take us to the pyramid apex. For example, you might need to provide methodological details. Why? Because maybe, those details are necessary for the reader to understand how the study was conducted, so that then you can critique that study. Because if you want to critique the methodology of a particular study, you've got to show us, first of all, how it was conducted, right? You might want to present several key points introduced in one work. So maybe there is like a seminal book or a groundbreaking study that made, 2 or 3 really important contributions. So then, you can introduce that study and then say, what these 2-3 key points are. You might also want to spend some more time if you're critiquing a particular study, so that you can cover all the bases and then first maybe present that study briefly and then show us the limitation of it. And then, maybe you might want to detail the results of a particular study as well. And that's when you're going to provide a little bit more detail. So let's look at an example. In here, I'm going to show you an example where, the writer is focusing in more detail about one study because they are outlining several key points. So, in here we are really presenting a seminal work and we are introducing several important points, right? That's why, we are spending 2 very long sentences, almost like an entire paragraph on one particular study. Right? But notice that, we don't continuously refer to this study. We don't say Widdowson 1994 after every single sentence. For example, the second sentence starts with, he also further criticizes. And we know that he refers to Widdowson because that's the only previous researcher that has been mentioned, right? And it's not necessary to put Widdowson at the end of that sentence again, right? Now, you could also, focus on one study in a lot of detail in several sentences, but this can also sometimes be done in just one sentence using relative clauses. For example, we can add a little bit more to the sentence to give us some detail about, for example, what a researcher did. For example, you've got this, right? So we've got Sirba and Rose, who analyzed for English as a foreign language course books, right? So this is adding some extra information about how the study was conducted, where it was conducted, right? and this must be, of course, relevant in the context of your argument and the pyramid apex. But that's not another way of doing this, right? So, with relative clauses, so those who and which, there are a couple of important points. So, use who to add more information about a researcher, so a person, right? And then notice that you always put a comma before it and a comma at the end of that clause as well, right? And use which or that to add information about a study, right? In a study which that investigated, right? And in here there is no comma because we are defining this study. We've got in a study, we don't know which one this is, and you're providing us some more information to define it, right? And you can also omit which or that by putting the verb in ing, right? So in a study investigating this issue in Vietnam, Yang concluded that, right? So this is how relative clauses work. Now, I want you to notice as well that there we are using past simple quite a lot. So we discussed present perfect, present simple, but also what is used is past simple. So you've got an example here. Sirba and Rose who analyzed, right? That's in the past. And past simple is also quite simple. It's just the basic verb with ed. 99% of the time it's regular. Some typical irregular verbs are lead, led, deal, dealt, find, found, right? But really 99% of the verbs are regular. So, and this past simple is most typically used when we talk about what a researcher did. In other words, to talk about the methodology of a particular study. We don't use past simple to talk about, the writer's position, what is generally true, what the writer, what the results were and things like that. We very often use it to talk about the methodology of a particular study. And if you want more information on it, then remember we had the reporting verbs grammar cheat sheet, right? And in here you've got past simple, right? That is also presented here and how to use it. And then I also prepared for you another cheat sheet with the most common irregular verbs. And it's also available in the resources section, right? So you can download it. It's a PDF document. Right, and as I said, in academic writing, 90% of verbs are regular. So you don't have to worry about them. You just add ed at the end. But there are a few that are common and they are irregular, right? There aren't many, as you can see, there's probably like 10, 15 here. I made a list for you, right? And you've got them in the past simple and the past participle. A lot of the times, past simple and past participle are the same. Right? Sometimes they are different, like showed and shown, or took and taken, right? But there aren't really many of them, right? So, again, if you feel that this is something that you're struggling with, and you want to be more accurate, then I would just print it out, put it somewhere next to you when you're writing, have it readily available so that you can look at these verbs as you're writing and avoid, the most common problems.
Sorry to interrupt, but if you're enjoying this video and you want more videos like that, you want personalized help writing an excellent thesis or research papers, then schedule a free one-to-one consultation where we're going to dive deeper into your current challenges and prepare a personalized plan that will help you to achieve your goals faster. And then if it turns out it's a good fit, we can talk about how working together would look like. Let's get back to the video.
Alright, so at this stage, you know why waffling is bad, both for your health and for, your literature review. And you also know how to be critical and structure a coherent argument in your literature review and how to summarize information from various sources or sometimes focus on one study in more detail. Now, what I want to look at now is how to vary the patterns in your literature review. So that you can you're further able to structure a more coherent argument, but also so that you really avoid repetition. And I find that repetition very often also leads to being very descriptive in your literature review, and because of that it also fails to deliver any sort of coherent argument. So varying the patterns is very, very important, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So first, what is pattern variation? It's basically varying how we refer to the literature and what structures and vocabulary you use to do so. So for example, you can refer to the literature by putting the name of the author as part of the sentence at the beginning. Like, for example, you could say something like, "You 2020 shows that." But you could also say, you could put the study at the beginning and then put the author in brackets at the end of the sentence, right? So, or you could start with the results, right? So you could say something like, another study shows that, and then at the end you put the author in brackets. And obviously which one you choose has an impact on how your text flows in terms of ideas and where you're going with that argument, right? So that's really, really important here, I think. So once again, why do we do it? Why pattern variation? Well, we do it to, first of all, avoid repetition. So imagine a situation in which, the writer basically starts every single sentence with the name of the author. So they say, "You shows that," and then they say, "Gonzalez concludes that," and then they say, "Kiczkowiak demonstrates that." It just after even a couple of sentences, it becomes really repetitive, and more importantly, it's difficult to see a coherent flow. Where is that person going with all that repetition? Because it just starts becoming like a list of, of studies, but that's not what a literature review is. A literature review is not just a list of all the studies that you've read. A literature review is a coherent argument that's going towards the pyramid apex. So that's why pattern variation is really, really important. How can you include pattern variation in your literature review? Well, first of all, you can use a variety of specific reporting verbs, right? So you definitely don't want to use verbs like say or tell or write, because they are way too simple and not academic. But you want to use more academic and specific words like shows, demonstrates, but also you want to vary them. So you don't want to be all the time saying shows, you shows, Gonzalez shows, another study shows, because that just becomes very repetitive as well. And you want to be picking the specific reporting verb depending on its meaning, because obviously the verb shows is different from the verb finds, and it's yet different from the verb reveals, or from a verb like concludes or highlights, right? They all have a slightly different meaning. And so varying this pattern can help you, underline what your point is and what you're trying to tell us from this study that you're presenting. And this is very, very important. And you, as I mentioned before, you also want to change between end of sentence and beginning of sentence references. So just as a reminder, you could include, the reference to the study or the person who did that study at the beginning of your sentence, like, Gonzalez shows that. But you could also put it at the end. You could just write the sentence and then stick the reference at the end. And you want to vary the two, and also notice what's more common in your field and how researchers usually do it. And then, you also want to emphasize different points, right? So you could emphasize the action that took place. In other words, what the researchers did. So you could say, something like, one study found that, or this study concludes that, right? So this kind of emphasizes what the researchers did in that study. But you could, of course, put slightly more emphasis on the researcher. If you put the researcher at the front of the sentence, that kind of, subconsciously for the reader, that places more emphasis on that as well. You could, of course, emphasize the study, especially if you say something like, in a classic or in a groundbreaking study, right? So if you kind of start the sentences with the study, the research, that puts more emphasis to that. Or you could also focus on the time, right? So you could say things like, more recently, or in the last decade, right? Or in 2018. So there you clearly want to emphasize the time, maybe because you've got some sort of chronological development in your paragraph, right? And then it makes perfect sense to kind of emphasize the time to see how things developed over time. So, perhaps this sounds a little bit theoretical and out there and, not practical enough. So I just want to show you a couple of examples of how this actually works in practice. So first of all, here you can emphasize the researcher. So here's an example from a text. And you can see that, the sentences kind of start with the writers, right? The authors, the researchers, right? And that kind of, places more emphasis on that, right? On the researchers. Now, you could emphasize the topic, right? Or in other words, what the researchers did in the study. Like if you say things like have aimed to, this kind of introduces what the researchers tried to do, right? It doesn't focus some more on the researcher because we don't even have the name of the researcher in the sentence, right? But more on what they did, right? Same here, even others have evaluated, right? That kind of again focuses on the action, on the topic, on what the researchers did. Right, and and notice as well the difference in purpose. Like in this paragraph, the writer does it because their purpose is to review like the main topics that have been studied so far. So it kind of, and because there is more than one researcher that did a certain things or evaluated a certain things, then it makes perfect sense to focus on the topic or the action rather than the researcher, right? But we can, of course, emphasize the investigation or time as well, right? So we can say things like in a classic study, right? And then 10 years later, and then more recently, right? So in here we have a bit of a chronological development because you can see that, the first study mentioned is 2006, then we've got 2012 and 2019. So, I'm starting with a classic study because that was, the first study, let's say, to do something. Right? And then I'm going, forward in time. So in order to make that chronological development, I kind of have to first emphasize the time. I have to say 10 years later, right? And then, finally more recently, right? Because my development here is chronological, that's why I'm choosing to focus more on that than, like the researcher did here, focus more on, on the topic or on what the researchers did, right? So, in order to kind of further consolidate it, I prepared a cheat sheet for you, and it's called Literature Review Pattern Variation cheat sheet. It's available for you to download in the resources section right above the video. All right, so I'll pull it up for you here on the screen. So it's called Literature Review Pattern Variation cheat sheet. It's a PDF document. Right, and it looks like this, and this basically gives you like all the most common phrases for the different types of pattern variation. So we've got emphasizing the researcher, but we've got emphasizing the time as well, the topic, the investigation, right? Highlighting what the researcher did in the study, right? So there's quite a lot in here, presenting researcher's position as well, right? So that's I would really recommend that you take a quick look at that, and if you find that difficult, definitely again print it or have it readily available for yourself as you're writing, so you don't have to kind of spend time thinking about like how to say it. You've got it all here, right? So I've done the hard work for you. You now just have to take it and use it, and try to vary the patterns. But don't vary them just for variation's sake. There's got to be a point to it. So remember that, we emphasizing time because time is important in that paragraph because there is chronological development. That's why I'm emphasizing the time. I'm emphasizing the topic because, what I want to show is what the researchers did. Yeah, what have been some of the topics that people have studied, right? I'm emphasizing the investigation or that particular study because it's a very important study, and I need to point that out. And the whole kind of organization of my paragraph is around different important study. So always keep the pyramid apex in mind as you're doing it. Always, 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 right? So that's how this is done. Now we're going to move on to the last point here, which is linking your ideas together. And this is crucial, really. This is, I left it until the last moment here because, it's kind of the icing on the cake. Like you first need the content, and you first need to start writing the literature review, and you need to know your pyramid apex, and you need to know how to summarize information and start actually doing it. But then the icing on the cake that's vital is linking your ideas together. And it's vital because, without linking your ideas together, it will be really, really difficult for the reader to understand what's your main point. It will be really difficult for the reader to see what the pyramid apex is. The reader will kind of have to guess a lot of the times, and it won't be that obvious. So that's why, you want to learn how to link them together, so that, this will help the reader. But also the second really important point is that I think it will really help you to develop a coherent argument and avoid being descriptive. Because if you once you've written, let's say, a couple of sentences, like, you should ask yourself, like, what is the purpose of that second sentence that I wrote? I mean, what is its relationship to the first sentence? Is it giving contrasting information, or is it the effect of the previous sentence? And if you can't figure that out, then it means that your two sentences don't make any sense, right? So being aware of how to link your ideas together will also help you structure a more coherent argument. So this is really, really important. So first of all, what is linking your ideas together? It's basically using words and phrases that connect our ideas into a logical flow. So to give you an example of a word, firstly, secondly, however, right? These words connect our ideas. But of course, we can also use whole phrases, like despite the fact that. But also, phrases that kind of repeat what has been said before, like, another problem with this approach is, right? So let's say previously, a couple of sentences ago, you said, one problem with this approach is. And now, a couple of sentences later, you're saying, another problem with this approach is. And that, provides a beautiful link between your ideas. And as a reader, it's crystal clear to me what you're doing in that text. Why we do it? Well, as I said, it ensures coherence and guides the reader along to the pyramid apex, really. So, first of all, it helps you, once again, to have clarity on your way towards the pyramid apex, and it guides the reader. So you can think of it as road signs, So when you're driving your car or riding your bike, there are plenty of signs around you that can help you, not have an accident, right? And they help you get to your destination safely, and they help other users of that road, in our case of a PhD, the readers, to get safely to their destination as well without having a crash, right? And if we take away all those signs from the road, like, there will be crashes all the time. And that's what happens with a thesis or a research paper. If you take away all linking, there is just crashes everywhere. Like, your logic crashes, like your pyramid apex crashes, the reader has a crash with your ideas as well, and it hurts really to read your text, and it all goes to hell, really. So think about this analogy, road signs, and they're very, very important for your own safety and for the safety of other users of that same road. So where do we do it, like linking your ideas together? Well, first of all, we do it within sentences, right? So you might have one sentence, and in that sentence, you have some sort of linking, like, unless you use linking words, comma, it is difficult to have cohesion in your text, right? So you have unless linking it within one sentence. But of course, you can do that between two sentences. So like, first, you need to have a clear idea on what the topic of the paragraph is. Stop. Second, or moreover, you also need to know how to link your ideas, right? But you want to do it between paragraphs as well. So let's say, you know, the first paragraph talked about, you know, the first principle of linking your ideas, right? And it said something like, you know, the first really important way in which you can link your ideas together is to use linking words. And we describe that in one paragraph. Now, the second paragraph is going to say something like, you know, the second or another really important principle of linking your ideas together is blah, blah, blah. And this clearly provides a beautiful link between the two paragraphs. And you can do the same between sections in your literature review. So you might remember, you know, I showed you your literature review template. If you haven't downloaded it yet, if you haven't started using it, go back to that lecture and then download it there. And in that template, I indicated, you know, here provide a link to the following section, right? So that's, you know, that's why I'm telling you to also do this in order, because kind of everything makes more sense as well when you're doing these videos in order. Is, you know, so you have to provide links between those sections, and it can be as simple as saying like, you know, bearing this in mind, the following section will focus on, and then you tell us what the focus on is. You know, it could be something as simple, right? And then the same thing with chapters, you know, and again, it can be very simple. It can be something like, you know, having presented the methodology, the following chapter presents the results of the study, or something like this, right? Again, very simple link, but it, you know, it then binds your whole writing together, and it's much easier for the reader to understand why you're doing what you're doing and why you've put certain things in a certain order. And believe me, it will really help you clarify that for yourself. And as you're going through this process of linking your ideas together, you will discover plenty of places where you're like, hold on, this actually doesn't make any sense. I can't find any logical link between these two sentences or paragraphs or sections. So I need to think how to move them around. So how do we do it? Well, I've already given you quite a few examples. You know, you can use linking words like however, because, in addition, you know, despite, and things like that. You can also use determiners. Determiners are words like this or that or these or those, right? Which basically substitute, you know, another word that you've used before, or like used to kind of point to which specific approach or word we're talking about, like this approach, right? Or these factors, like the ones that I've mentioned before. You can use pronouns. Pronouns are basically used to substitute a given noun, like, so instead of saying approach, you just say it, and in the next sentence, and this provides a clear link. And you can also use relative clauses, and I've shown you before in this video a little bit more about how to use relative clauses, right? And they, you know, relative clauses start with who, which, that, where, when, and things like that, right? So let's give a couple of examples. You know, maybe this was, you know, a little bit high level, theoretical. Let's dive into some practical examples here. So how can we do it within a sentence? Well, for example, like this, using although, right? Although the sample size was not specifically powered to examine socio-demographic differences, the spelling is wrong actually here. There shouldn't be a hyphen. Sorry about that. In self-monitoring behaviors, it does represent da-da-da. So although here is always used to show contrast in one sentence. You can't use although to show contrast with the previous sentence. It's always between two different ideas in one sentence. Remember about that. How do you show, in this case, contrast between two sentences? Well, these results cannot be generalized to other forms of dietary self-monitoring. Stop. However, electronic forms, blah, blah, blah. So this second sentence, starting with however, is going to have a different idea, some sort of contrast with the previous sentence. Now, we can also do it between paragraphs, right? So we've got the end of one paragraph here, and then we've got a beginning of a new paragraph here. And in this case, the linking is very simple. It's just using the word however, right? And you could use other linking words like furthermore or something like this, but you could also use some phrases or try to repeat one of the key ideas of the previous paragraph to provide that logical link. And of course, you can do that between sections, right? So consequently, in the following section, English as a lingua franca, English as an international language research will be explored, right? So it's very simple. You just say in the following section, and then you tell us what you're going to do, and consequently provides a nice link to, you know, to what happened before in this section, right? And between chapters as well. Like in the following chapter, the study proper is discussed. Very simple, but again, you know, provides really beautiful links between all the parts of your thesis, and does in the long term make a huge difference for, you know, creating a coherent argument, right? So if you ever hear that, you know, your thesis doesn't flow, there is no story to it, as a lot of supervisors like to say, it's very likely because your ideas are not linked coherently, and there is, as a result, there is no clear pyramid apex, and as a result, your writing isn't going anywhere. And adding that linking will really help you do that. So I prepared another cheat sheet for you, and it's called Linking Your Ideas Together cheat sheet, to sort of help you consolidate that, really. And it's a PDF document, right? I'll pull it up for you here on the screen. You can download it from the resources section above this video, right? And in here I explain, you know, the 3 or the 4 levels actually of linking, right? Within sentences, between paragraphs, and between sections and chapters, right? So, you know, what we've got here, you know, we've kind of already covered, but I also wanted to give you a table with, you know, the most common linking words. I'm not saying these are all linking words, but these are the ones that I used most frequently in research, actually, right? So these are the ones that you should be using. So here are the words that we would use for addition. What I mean by addition is, you know, adding kind of similar information, right? Or adding information on the same topic to what you've already said. In terms of contrast, notice that we can have contrast between 2 sentences. This is actually, sorry, this is the other way. This is the other way around. I need to correct it because it's not correct. Linking your ideas together cheat sheet. Right, sorry about that. It's actually the other way around. So this is to link ideas within one sentence, and then these are to link ideas between 2 sentences, right? It should be like that. So yeah, notice that you can show contrast between 2 sentences. So basically what happens with these words, right, is that, you know, you have a sentence before and you finish that sentence, and then the new sentence introduces different information, some sort of contrast, right? And that's when you're going to use these linking words. On the other hand, you can also have linking words within one sentence. So this basically means that you have 2 different ideas in the same sentence, and that's when you're using these words, right? Now, in here you can see that despite is has the fact that in brackets, and the reason for that is that, you know, if you want to follow despite with a sentence, then you need to use the fact that. So if you want to say, you know, despite the fact that I worked very hard today, I did not write very much, right? Then you need to use the fact that. With although or while you don't, right? Despite and in spite of can also be followed by verb ing. So like, despite working very hard, I didn't whatever, right? So that's kind of the main difference in terms of grammar, right? And then we can also give reasons, right, for something, and that's done within one sentence, right? So, you know, since I worked very hard, I achieved my goals, or due to the fact that I worked hard, or due to working hard, I achieved my goals, right? So it's all one sentence here. And then we can also show consequence, and that's done between 2 sentences, right? So you have one sentence, you finish it, and then you say something like, you know, consequently, like, you know, I worked very hard, full stop. As a result, I achieved my results, right? Or thus, I achieved my results, right? That's kind of how it works. So this works between 2 sentences, and this is within 1 sentence. Now you'll notice that I kind of crossed out some words, and these are just informal, not very academic words, so like so, but, right, that you should avoid. And also when it's used at the beginning of a sentence followed by comma, it's slightly informal. If you say, you know, it should also be pointed out that, that's perfectly fine. If you kind of put also, you know, in between some other words, then it's fine. But if you start a sentence with also, it sounds just a little bit informal. So that's something that you should pay attention to. All right. So that's the cheat sheet here for you. Right. We've covered quite a lot of ground here today. Really a lot of ground. But, you know, after this video, you know, you've got all the bases covered. You know how to find texts. You've found a lot of text. You've taken a lot of notes. You've structured your entire literature review. And now in this video, I showed you how to write your literature review and really how to, you know, how to spell everything out and how to get the creative juices flowing and get it done, you know. And first of all, we talked about the importance of avoiding waffling, right? So, you know, I introduced that image of Belgian waffles on purpose. Like, try to remember it. If you visualize things like that with certain images, you're more likely to remember it. So remember, you know, waffles are delicious, but, you know, they're kind of full of calories, right? They're full of unnecessary words. And despite being delicious, they're not very nutritious, right? They don't have a lot of vitamins. In other words, they don't have a lot of content. So if you're waffling, you're being descriptive, you're using a lot of words, but you're not really giving us any content, you know, and you're not going anywhere. So that's why, you know, we talked about how to be critical and how to develop an argument. And remember, you always have to keep the pyramid apex in mind. That's why, you know, in one of the previous videos, you learned how to clarify that pyramid apex for every section, because this allows you to develop an argument, right? And then we also talked about summarizing information from various sources. And this really is what you will have to be doing most of the time in your literature review. So, you know, in a PhD, you really need to show that you have read widely, and you need to be able to support your arguments with a wide range of sources. Very important. And then sometimes, you know, there are situations where you might want to focus on one study in more detail, right? This will probably be, you know, roughly speaking, maybe 10% of the time, but sometimes you might want to do that. And then, you know, towards the end of this video, we also talked about how to vary your reference patterns, right? So how to, you know, use, for example, how to structure your sentences in a different way to either emphasize the researcher, emphasize what the researchers did, emphasize the time, emphasize the study, in order again to, you know, to take the reader towards the apex of the pyramid to develop a clear argument. Because if every single sentence in your literature review has the same pattern, i.e. it starts with the author, like Gonzalez found that, then it's just a list of different studies. It's not a literature review. So varying your pattern is very important. And finally, you know, crucial, linking ideas together. Within sentences, between paragraphs, between sections, and between even chapters, you know. And that's really what allows you as well to have a coherent story in your thesis or in your research papers, linking your ideas together. So that's it. That's how it's done. And now you know what to do next. Get it done. Avoid waffling. Be critical. Develop an argument and link your ideas together.